Okay, everybody, so this is part two of our series on the U.S.'s expansion in the 1840s. This one is part two, the war against Mexico. Let's find out. Let's learn some history. Here we go. So the last time we saw each other here, James Polk was president and he was an expansionist. He's a pro-slavery Democrat. The man has slaves on a plantation in Tennessee. And the guy is also a goal-oriented president. One of his main policies is that he wants California. He is thinking of expanding the U.S. territory and he wants California. But the only way to get California is to offer Mexico some money. So he sends emissaries to California. They try to buy California, but largely Mexico disagrees. They don't want to sell. They don't want anything to do with Polk. They think this guy is a little nuts. They don't want to basically, they don't want to deal with this guy. So James Polk is upset. He sends more troops to occupy the area in Texas, which is between the Rio Nueces and the Rio Grande. And there, American troops get into kind of a scuffle there with Mexican troops. Blood is shed, and Polk claims that it's American blood that is shed on American soil. So he claims that the Mexicans invaded the United States and he declares war. He asks Congress to declare war. So let's go to the war. The war itself begins here in 1848. And here's a map showing you the overview. So the war largely has three fronts. Let's take a look at each one here so you can see where this happens. So the first front is around this area, which is now New Mexico. And this second front is out here in California. But most of it happens here in what is Mexico, right? So we have these three fronts and about 60,000 American troops serve in this war. This is a conflict where American volunteers go fight on these three fronts, and Generals Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott are the ones that sort of occupy this area of Mexico. So, sorry about that. That's Generals Taylor and Scott who kind of occupy this area. And eventually by 1848, the United States is occupying Mexico City, which is the first war that the United States fights on foreign soil, and where the U.S. actually occupies a capital city, which is pretty impressive for the United States, given that they were a very relatively young country, and the Mexicans, as you can imagine, are not very happy about this. So let's find out what happens here. More and more Americans are really into this war. This war was really popular, but there were some critics. And chief among these critics of Manifest Destiny were guys like Henry David Thoreau here. That's Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau refused to pay taxes to fund the war, so he was arrested in his famous civil disobedience. He sort of outlines why he is angry about this and how he doesn't want his taxes to pay for this conflict. Another guy that's pretty critical of the war is General Grant here. Now, General Grant served with honor and distinction in the war, but after the war he was sort of critical. He called this war unjust. He says, this is an unjust war. This is not a conflict that we should have fought. This was a strong country kind of taking advantage of a weak country. But one of the main critics here is Abraham Lincoln. And young Lincoln is a politician here in Illinois when he sort of starts criticizing the war in Mexico. And he calls for something called the spot resolution. Spot resolution. Meaning that he wants to know exactly what spot American blood was shed on American soil. He wants proof, in other words. He wants receipts. He wants to know that Americans were actually killed on American soil. So he wants this war to actually mean something, right? And it kind of becomes an unpopular feeling. A lot of Americans don't really support him, and a lot of historians think that he's losing his seat in Congress the following term because of this attitude he takes towards the war. Now, eventually the war finalizes, and the treaty that finalized the war is called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This is the treaty that cedes all of this territory in white from Mexico to the United States. And it's got territories in there like California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and Texas, obviously. And this territory was ceded to the United States for the sum of roughly $15 million. And in Mexican memory, this is a sad moment here. This is a moment where the United States sort of becomes really powerful, and Mexico sort of has to cope with its weaknesses as a nation. And the United States eventually buys this other territory called the Gadsden Purchase. Gadsden Purchase in 1853. And just so you know, it also buys Alaska in 1867 from Russia. And this is another way that the U.S. sort of acquires territory in the 1840s. As you can imagine, this is a sad moment for the Mexicans. They lost a lot of their territory, and the United States gained millions of square miles of territory here. And this is a pretty big deal for both countries. All right, hope this was helpful.